Thank you, as always, for pressing play on Womb Stories Project. And thank you particularly for choosing to press play on this episode. It is likely, if not inevitable, to bring up more controversy than most of our episodes do. Of course, I know that. And I also want to say that this is a conversation that is like none other I've ever had. And I've been speaking about abortion for over 20 years. This is really intentionally different. It's two women who are womb healers coming together to share what we've learned through our own stories, through our own lived experience, and through holding and bearing witness to hundreds of other women who have journeyed through the experience of choosing to terminate a pregnancy. We speak to the physical, the emotional, the spiritual impact that this may have, owning that everybody's journey is unique and special, and holding this intention that as we storytell, we're able to choose and note where we find resonance in somebody else's story, where we find healing, where we find inspiration and hope. We hope that this conversation is full of that for you as well. So if you continue to listen, please do so taking care of yourself. Get yourself some extra grounding tea, take some good breaths. Feel free to press pause if and when it feels like it's time to shift and to tend to yourself. And know that we both finished the recording and quickly said, oh, I'm going to go have a steam now. So please consider all the modalities available to you to help you integrate the conversation and continue in the highest expression of your womb health and healing journey. Sending so much love. Thank you so much for being here today. It is such an honor. And this is a conversation we're about to have that I am really looking forward to. I have truly never spoken this conversation out into the world before. That's such a beautiful opportunity. And it comes with a bit of trepidation, but also so much gratitude for the opportunity. I want to invite you to speak about who you are and what your work in the world is to help ground and orient us. And I'd like to go in and share some of the written work that was the catalyst to set up this conversation today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kit, for having me. It's really an honor to be here. This conversation has been weaving itself into being for some time now. I'm just really excited to sit with you and share our hearts and share our stories. So, who am I in the world? I answer this question different each time, so we'll see what comes out this time. I am a hands-on pelvic care practitioner, devotee to the pelvis and the womb. And my work really centers around scar tissue. So I am certified and deeply devoted to the practice of scar tissue remediation and scar tending. That extends beyond physical scar tissue, right? I do hands-on work with episiotomy scars, with cesarean scars, with, all of the scars that we may find in our bodies, in our pelvises and the surrounding areas. But it also extends to the existential scar tissues. What is the scar tissue that we carry from just the experiences of walking through this world in the bodies that we are walking in? That's a big part of my work. I'm also a somatic sexologist and pleasure doula. So we can't have the conversation of pelvic health without also talking about pleasure. And I am also the guide and creator of the Bone Song Mystery School, which is, to my knowledge, the only mystery school that is really created by and for mothers to really walk us through the very specific priestess path mystery school of what it is to be a mother in these times. So those are the sort of main pillars of my work right now.
Beautiful. Oh, so beautiful. Okay, well, on this theme of motherhood, we are really holding the space to talk in a really honest, personal way around what it means to be presented with the chance of motherhood and to decide not to go forward with a pregnancy. And through abortion or termination, I will use both of those terms as they resonate and shift differently in my narrative. But I will just say that I have been thinking about the limitations of the ways in which I feel safe in talking about abortion for many, many years, many decades. And I'll get into my personal story in a moment. But there's something interesting that happens, I think, when you step into your 30s, and it really shifts because the conversations and the awareness around terminating pregnancy is now often a choice that's happening amongst women who have children already. And it just seemed to bring an even deeper level of complexity into the reality of how few healing spaces there are. And in the current cultural moment, this gets really, the whole topic gets so siloed into a pro-choice, anti-choice paradigm that it seems like it sucks all the space from really the heart-womb connection and the reality of the experience of all aspects of unplanned or unwanted pregnancy. And so when you speak of scar tissue, I really love that for so many reasons, because it is something that I can visualize as an image that makes almost this emotional residue more concrete, because I think a lot of us might actually have literal physical scar tissue, but definitely have emotional and spiritual scar tissue that is so important and meaningful to oil and massage and love up on and to welcome as here, because it's here. And we don't get a lot of opportunities to name that truth. So thank you. I was having a conversation with a very dear friend who is a beautiful, incredible mother who had chosen to terminate a pregnancy. She was really speaking to how narrow the conversations she could have were. It's scary in this climate to even speak that reality out loud to a best friend of many, many years. She was able to kind of access the conversation through sharing that her primary doctor was not able to help her any longer because of the hospital's religious affiliation. And that was sort of an interesting entry point, considering that I think what was really on her heart and in her being was this question of where the grief could be and could it be named if it was alongside the gratitude and the knowingness that it was the right choice for her at that time. And so I had just been in this very deep inquiry and witnessing and listening and feeling, if I admit, a little bit victim-y and frustrated that I was in a story of like, there aren't spaces to have these conversations. And with that, I was truly blessed by your post about just this. And so, with your permission, I would love to read this Instagram post that was so powerful that had me reach out in a teary gratitude DM voice text and facilitate this one and then this conversation. So, okay, this is Juliana's post from November 15th, 2025. I'm going to read the series of beautiful slides first. As we demand and defend the right to choose, modern women have forgotten what it actually means for death to move through their bodies. We are encouraged to celebrate and be grateful for modern medicine and the miracle that we didn't have to give up our lives or careers or our rightful place in society for a child we do not want. But in the privacy of our own hearts and bodies, there is a primal grief, a permanent mark of death having passed through us that never leaves us and that our culture has no idea how to hold. Now let me be crystal clear. I support a woman's sovereignty to choose what life she does or does not bring through her body. I always will. But choosing death without the acknowledgement of the weight that carries is making women sick. I have worked with many women who feel very confused by the mix of grief and relief they feel after a pregnancy release. The unmetabolized grief lives in our wombs and takes up residence in our tissues. It took me years to recognize the unmetabolized grief that was living in my body after my abortion, even though I chose it. As bringers of life, women are also the keepers of the threshold of death, and it is time we remember the rights and spiritual responsibilities that come with that. Hands-on, hands-in ceremonial pelvic care is a space where these rights can be remembered and the sacred, nuanced complexities of the rights we are fighting to defend can be explored. On the table, there is space for all of it. The wisdom of your body speaks between, beyond, and around political beliefs and gets right to the heart of a truth much more real and ancient. So yes, let us fight for our right to choose without forgetting what the fullness of that choice entails. I feel so grateful to be living in a time where we can have these conversations. And I just want to honor all the women and all the men who've loved us to get us to this point, because I am struck by the need for these conversations and the privilege it is to have them in ways that my mother at my age and my grandmother and great-grandmothers would not have had access to. So really feeling the lineage and all that was fought to bring us here, and hopeful that these conversations will bring forth a different reality and experience for our children. So thank you. I will now give you an opportunity to speak more to that.
Oh, thank you so much, Kit. Yeah, it's a really interesting experience to hear those words read back, after some months. I mean, that post went more viral than anything that I've ever written, which is a really interesting experience to have because, I mean, my hands were shaking when I wrote it. It was like, oof, and that's how I know when something needs to be spoken, right? It's like when my voice shakes, when my body shakes, when my hands shake, I'm like, it was literally like I woke up in the morning and it just came through. It was just this message that needed to come through. And it was met with lots of gratitude, lots of resonance, and also a lot of pushback as well of like, not an experience of grief for everybody. To be able to sort of widen our aperture of what does this conversation actually get to be? And can we create space for all of the experiences, right? And so following that, I then created a space called Fertile Fallow. And I will probably create this space again where we brought this conversation off of the off of the social media and into a private space where we could really talk about it and actually work with our bodies and with our tissues, with the beautiful practice of steaming. I guess one of my kinks, Kit, I'll have to say, is paradox. It's like paradox, nuanced conversation, right? Where both can be true. We can be both grateful and grieving. We can be both relieved and so sad. I love creating these spaces where we can have conversation where two seemingly opposite realities can be true. And maybe that's like a feminine experience, I think, of something that I've noticed of just like feminine energetics where there can be this nuance that it's not black and white, right? There isn't a right or a wrong or a true or a false. There's something else. And so I feel like this conversation around terminating pregnancy, this conversation around abortion gets to be that because it is so complex. And I think the narrative that has been really prominent in our culture is that it is only teenage girls, teenage pregnancies, an oops or an accident. There's this narrative of the sort of naivety that goes with it as well, which is also true. This is not to say that this is not a true story, but there's also women who are in their 30s who maybe already have 2 or 3 children, who know that it's not the time, who are in a devoted, loving, committed partnership, and who know that it's not the time and the space to bring forward another child. There's this whole other side of the story, and I feel like that actually does not get told, where
Mhm.
can be a very informed, grounded decision that, of course, we speak of, like, all of the ways that this can actually happen, right? From herbal to at home to in clinic. There are many, many ways. And then whenever there's shame or taboo around something, it makes it very difficult to actually have aftercare spaces for ourselves. So we go through an incredibly intense experience like that, and because we're either being good feminists and we're like, I exercise my feminist right to do this thing that, my grandmothers didn't have access to. So therefore I should feel grateful and move on with my life. There's that side of the story, right? And there's no space in there to also feel the complexity of oh, what if? Like, what if? Who would this
Mhm.
child have been? What would it have been like to have carried birthed this person through my body? And then on the other side, the shame of it, the shame or the hiding or having to go against our own religious beliefs or beliefs that kind of keep us belonging into a certain group of society as well. So there's a whole spectrum. And my intention with writing this piece and starting this conversation was to let's just air out the house a little bit. Let's
Yeah.
open all the windows and the doors and just see, when we're not trying to stay in one narrow lane, what conversations can be had.
That is what I resonated with so much. It helped me see even more consciously how much I was in a more narrow lane than I understood myself to be because of not knowing that it was like a multi-highway, multi-dimensional highway space. But I just didn't know because that hadn't ever been introduced to me in my journey here. So I think I will orient people with my journey up until today, which, to get sort of to the point, is that I terminated a pregnancy in my early 20s. And I already in my early 20s was a real advocate for abortion rights, had been to national marches, had been working on college campuses to support women's rights to choose and access to abortion care. I was also really involved in work to prevent and appropriately respond to sexual assault. And I was in that work very deeply when I experienced a sexual assault, which I struggled to navigate healing from, particularly because it seemed to take much from me, including my identity at being somebody who was in the work of advocacy for sexual assault victims and survivors who was what didn't have direct experience. That felt so important to me. I wanted more of us. And then I was no longer one.
Mm,
And I say this because it's my truth and because I've now heard hundreds of stories that show me that this is really an archetypal journey almost. So I want, in case somebody else is hearing this, to feel as seen as I've heard when I've heard somebody else share this, but it really left a very strong and traumatized blueprint on my sexuality.
mm,
And I started not tending to myself and my sexuality in safe ways, and had consensual, but lots of more reckless sex because of that assault. From those experiences, became pregnant and was very disassociated from my body in those days, and was surprised I was as pregnant as I was. Lots was going on in my life. A friend had been hurt, and I found myself about 11 weeks pregnant and knew very clearly that I was not going to continue with the pregnancy. I was literally moving across the country 2 days later to start my master's program. And so I called Planned Parenthood and I had an abortion. And later that night, I flew to London. Talk about no time to process. Like I look back on that young woman and I'm like, proud of the strength and the like logistics and the certainty. And I'm also just like, oh my goodness, like, thank God your best friend was there to be with you and to hug you. But also, then it was like, well, relief, gratitude. That's what to focus on. And I was. But I didn't know I was on this multidimensional, multi-lane highway. I also thought that that was it. So really double down on that, because the only other option was a devastation that carried so much self-blame. It would break me. So I went along my way for years and years and felt such conflict in the paradox that you were saying, speaking to, that like this was absolutely the right choice. And I felt so conflicted about having made it. How can those two things be? I will sort of do an asterisk here. This is my personal journey. I've listened to hundreds of women, so there are threads that connect us sometimes. There are women who don't feel this tension. And so I'm not meaning to place that on them. I'm just naming for myself and anybody who has a thread that is helpful to them to hear, to pull from them, that's here in this conversation with the intention of healing. There were a couple of moments that I did want to just speak to, knowing we were going to be having this conversation today. One was, let's say, like 6, 7 years later, in a family conversation. I come from a very liberal family, was very welcomed and supported to go to the national marches for RU 486 in 2000 on the national mall, which is now called the abortion drug. That was a very culturally supported thing in my family. So that's my background. And yet I was raised in the Catholic Church until I was about 10. But then the family narrative there was that the Pope around that time said, like, categorically women are not equal enough to be leaders in the church. And my mom pulled us out. And so even that was like a very feminist stance within. And it was jarring because we had to go every Sunday until we shouldn't go. I was in this family conversation where we were talking about women's rights from our perspective and fighting for the right to choose. My mother said to me, "Sometimes I wish I had had an abortion so that I could speak more publicly about it." Because we were talking about the dearth of voices and actually remembering that in the early 70s, one of the early Ms. magazines was a collage of so many prominent women coming out with their abortion stories. And noting that 30 years at that point on, how rare that would be. You don't have US senators now talking about abortions. You don't have moguls of business talking about abortions in the way that you actually did in the 70s. So my mom, this wonderful business leader and executive, she was coming from such a beautiful place. But when I heard her say that, I just shut down and I went to bed. I thought, you don't know what you're talking about. And I spoke to her about having had an abortion for the first time the next morning. I wanted to share with her like what had happened because I could see, she could see me shutting down. And that was beautiful to name that and to feel that support. But I'm not really sure we've ever talked about it since. And that was probably about 10, 15 years ago. For you too. But I just want to name that it was such a part of my fertility journey. I miscarried about 8 weeks into the first pregnancy I had that was so intentional. And I really struggled in processing that because that scar from my abortion 20 years earlier was so much more gnarly than I had ever been willing to look at. And so a huge part of my fertility journey was coming into a heart space piece around that decision in my 20s and really working with all of the different stories that were paradoxes, but coming at them with peace and love and compassion for the paradox rather than the traumatic swirl of judgment and shame and blame. That I do think the trauma guides a paradox in one way, and the peace and healing can hold a paradox in such a different way. And really doing that inner work, and STEAM was a huge part of that, for me, guiding me into that loving womb space, forgiveness, that shift into self reclamation and self responsibility from the self blame and shame allowed me, I believe, to step into healthy pregnancies after moving through all of that. So I dropped a lot in there. I'd love
Mhm.
to hear if and what any of that brings up for you in these considerations, to thank you, because I have been really dropped in from using STEAM to support the Kitara community through terminations, to seeing how different my whole journey would have been had I had somebody like you to hold me in a ceremony closer to the time and to hold all of the complexity, how much pain that would have saved me, and so many others. So thank you. You're doing it now. That is so profoundly beautiful. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Well, I just want to really honor your story. It's a courageous thing to share our story. So much sort of paradox and nuance and complexity, right? Of knowing it was the right choice and still being confronted with grief. And as a scar tissue practitioner, I'm also always thinking about what is the physical marks that an experience like that leaves. What is the physical scar tissue? And then what is also the emotional and the spiritual scar tissue? And so your story just speaks to all of that so beautifully. And sometimes we don't know what the emotional and physical scar tissue is until we have sort of moved into like another sort of fertility experience, whether it's a miscarriage or a subsequent pregnancy. You know, I've worked with many women who I just worked with someone recently who had chosen to terminate a pregnancy and then quite soon afterwards got pregnant again and chose to keep that pregnancy. And a lot of her work with me during her session, during her immersion was really about like reconciling the choice of like I know in my being that this was not the right time. And it and then quite quickly it changed to be the right time and to be able to come into that deep self-trust, part of our work together was like, well, how do we also invite, we like to call them spirit babies, how do we invite the spirit baby to be an ally, to be a part of this family, to be a part
Mhm.
of the conversation, and that we don't necessarily have to like act like it never happened. And so part of that was ritualizing the choice, but also creating this bridge from this choice to the next choice, which was to carry a pregnancy and to have a baby. And I think a lot of scar tissue work is about weaving together the parts of ourselves that we feel need to be separate, that we feel need to be, partitioned, that we feel need to be kind of like, okay, this needs to be over there, that needs to be over there. These narratives can't coexist. So part of that scar work is like, well, how do we make this into a cohesive story that we can tell, at least to ourselves? Like, here is my hero's journey of what it has been to be in my body and the choices that I've made and why I've made them. There's been quite a few women that I've worked with hands on that's been the story of like reconciling, like, why wasn't it the right time then? And why is it the right time now? It's one thing to have an idea of the narrative of the story or the process in our mind. It's another thing to really listen into the body, the wisdom of our tissues, the wisdom of our body, the wisdom of our womb, the wisdom of our pelvis, the wisdom of our scars, of like, what does my scar actually have to say about this? What does my womb actually have to say about this? What does my heart actually have to say about this? And I find that those stories tend to be much more rooted in the truth, perhaps, or less touched by the narrow cultural idea of what's allowed and what's not allowed. You spoke about steaming, and I wanted to just touch on that a little bit because obviously you speak about steaming. I have your beautiful stool right here. I'm looking at it actually. There are many practices, right, that we can learn to kind of come back to our throne, come back to our center. Steaming is one of the most beautiful, simple, accessible ways I find, especially around this topic, or especially around abortion, where we do often feel like our embodied authority, our embodied sovereignty has been taken in some way. And so to really be able to come back to our throne, back to our embodied sovereignty, our authority of like, this is a choice that I made. How can I, soften into that choice? And also, how can I center back into the center of my body with all of the swirling emotions, everything that's happening there? And so I found that steam has been beautiful, simple gentle practice to be able to move the grief. There's a lot of dignity in how it feels to sit on a steam, root soft, heart open, where a lot of this work can start to happen. So I just wanted to name that as well.
Oh,
Um,
thank you. I dignity, I'm sitting with that. I so resonate.
mm,
And that's really powerful. I've not quite ever used that word or that
mm,
energy, but it is a practice that can return that dignity to the embodied expression and knowing, which is beautiful. The scar tissue, can you speak to now? I'm fascinated. I'm like, maybe the steam was actually working even more in the physical level than I understood because I was aware and able to kind of read the ways that the practice was helping me come into this piece around the deep grief of the miscarriage, which honestly I felt like I wasn't allowed to be in because of the abortion I'd had.
uh-huh.
That was the mental loop I was in, which of
Yeah.
course made the pain of the grief that much worse.
Hmm.
So it just spiraled me down into this inner world that was so dark. The steam started lifting me back into these truths that you speak of like, this was a wise choice.
Mm.
Like you are grateful for having it. And it was a heavy choice. And you knew that. And though it was a quick decision and a quick process, it wasn't flippant. And it was heavy. I think that that was something that was important for me to claim. And I've said to some people over the years, and I I know the look of shock in other sort of liberal, I don't know what terms to use, but other people who really advocate for abortion rights when I say like, well, women are choosing to terminate, which means to end a life, to end the pregnancy.
Yeah.
And these aren't words that are often spoken because we're so fearful of what they'll mean to our rights. And so I get that. I've avoided them for so long too. And they were really important for me to say out loud, even if just to myself, because they felt true. They seem categorically true to me.
Mhm.
And I want to be able, part of my healing is to feel the capital T truth throughout my system. And it was hard and scary because that was a truth I thought I wasn't ever meant to know or to say. And yet I think that yeah, the dignity that this team brings back, it allows for that soft, gentle holding of the paradox.
Yeah. 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 One of the, in that post, I kind of played with the word right. Our grandmothers and our great grandmothers have fought for us to be able to have the right to choose, which is extremely important. And then there's the right, RITE, the right of what does it actually mean to be a guardian of the threshold of life and death? What does it actually mean to be the ones who actually have to make this decision? That is a big deal, I think. And you've already spoken to this, and I want to say, like, I don't think that this is everybody's experience, but for me, this has been my experience where, so to share a little bit about my story, I chose to terminate a pregnancy when I had two children already. I had two children. I think they were probably like 3 and 5, somewhere in there, or in like that, small age. And it was very, very clear to me that the relationship that I was in at the time, the pressure that was present in my life was not conducive to another child coming into the world. My body knew it, my heart knew it, and it was the most challenging decision I've ever had to make. I was in midwifery school at the time, so luckily I had a lot of support. I was supported by a beautiful community of midwives who really had a deep understanding of what this actually meant. Not to mention, access to ways of doing this at home, which is what I chose to do. I actually chose to have the abortion at home in the most beautiful way possible. It had my spirit grandmother was there. It was really as ceremonial and beautiful as it possibly could be. And yet, there were these deep markers of grief and in some ways it was similar. It was like, "Oh, but it was so beautiful. We did such a a beautiful sacred job of walking through this rite in the best way that we could. And there were these places that just couldn't be touched, no matter how ceremonial it was, no matter how right it was, no matter how beautiful it was. And for me, one of those moments was realizing, so after the abortion, that I'd already started to produce colostrum milk, right? So my breasts had already started, and that shook me and shocked me that my body was already readying itself to provide for this baby that I had chosen not to have. And there are these little many moments like that of the paradox of my body holding both life and death at once, and what that felt like. And there was no language, there was no framework, there was no map already existing to be with that. So for me, I think that was the seed of, oh, there's something missing here. And it would take me many, many years and in many ways, I'm still integrating this experience. I think we always are, but it would take me many years to sort of start to tease apart the big tangle that was that experience. Because there are physical considerations that we need to take, to make sure that we're doing it in a physically safe way, that the timing is correct, that we have the physical support that we need, that the kids are taken care of. There are all of these sort of physical considerations. And then, because I am who I am, there are also a lot of spiritual considerations that I took into place as well. And yet there was still something else that none of that could touch. I've finally been able to put words to the right of RITE, the right of choosing death. And how do we actually, it's not just a one-time choice, it's something that we live with. It's an embodied living experience now that I now hold. There's wisdom, there are codes here that I now hold that I didn't hold before, of having actually gone all the way through that process of going from life to death inside of my own body. I don't actually know the answer to this question. I don't actually know what the rights need to be for us to move through this process. But I do believe that there's a missing piece of the conversation, and that just having it, being able to recognize this experience as a spiritual rite of passage, right? As like a rite of passage of being in a female body, at least kind of puts this experience into a different category than just a rite that we exercise or a medical experience that we have that then we move on from and don't think about again.
Yeah.
Because I can say for myself, and I can say for many of the women that I work with in my practice, it's not a one-time thing, it's not one and done. So many women have this experience of seeing a 5-year-old and having that moment, that flashes by, "Oh, I might have had a 5-year-old." Having these markers or these milestones in our family, what would it be like to have 3 children at the table instead of 2? There are these unspoken, lightning quick little flashes that we have that then, because we don't really have a place to, like, land it, often create more trauma, I think, in our systems, because there's this, oh, I shouldn't be feeling that, or, oh, I should talk to somebody about that. Who do I talk to about it? I think we're doing it right now. We're creating a space to at least just start to have the conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. That was going to be my reply to you of you're doing it. We don't know how to do it, and yet you're doing it, you're creating it. That's so beautiful and so powerful. And I really do think this expansion of who we get to be as female bodies, it's so profound. And I love your ability also to name that we are still in inquiry of what this right is, and to also name that there isn't a finality point. And that's the healing journey, right? Like there just isn't. Those flashes I resonate with so much. And I also really honor you for leading these conversations and this work, and also sharing your story in this moment. In these times, even in these times, especially in these times, I'm not sure. It just depends on the way the wind blows in the moment to us and our hearts and our wombs. But it is beautiful and courageous and really deeply healing and meaningful to me. And I know so many others. So thank you, Juliana.
Oh, yeah, thank you for creating
Yeah.
the space. And,
Yeah.
you know, one thing that's just coming to mind, you were asking about scar tissue, is that there is actually often physical scar tissue that is left over from an abortion, that even that we don't talk about it. And generally, the providers of abortions don't talk about it either because we are wanting to protect the safety, the sanctity of this even being an option. And so when a woman comes to me and she has scar tissue in her cervix, or she, maybe has had a difficult birth, or she's wondering about, the dilation of her cervix with the scar tissue, to be able to just talk about it and to be able to actually physically hold that scar. And always, 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 when we hold the scar, there's emotional content, right? Because scars are really, they're like time capsules, right? For whatever you were feeling, generally, whatever you were feeling at the time when the scar was created lives in the tissue. And when we start to allow it to breathe, right? When we start to work with it physically, we work with it emotionally, we let the river flow again, right? We're taking the dam away, we can start to at least feel the full spectrum of emotion that was there. And so often when we feel the emotion that is in the scar itself starts to soften and melt as well. I want to speak to and normalize the fact that, abortion can be physically a traumatic experience, can be a painful experience, it can
Mhm.
be a medically intense experience. And I think we even minimize that because we're trying to make sure that that right doesn't get taken away, right? We're trying to say, oh, it's no big deal. It's,
Mhm.
safe procedure. And it is. And here we are in the paradox again. And it is intense, can be scary. It can be painful. It can leave scar tissue. And so again, I want to just, if anyone who's listening to this, you do have ongoing scar tissue or even pain or just a sensation of trauma or holding or tension in these areas that have experienced this event, even when our minds have an idea of what this is and why we're doing it and that it's right to do it, that doesn't mean that it doesn't register as trauma in the body. And I think medical surgical trauma is some of the most complex trauma because it's like, I chose to do this, I wanted to do this, and yet our body is like, whoa, something very wrong is happening, right? There's things aren't supposed to go that way, and so that to be able to, yeah, just reconcile both, this was the correct choice, I made it, for the reasons that I did, and my body's registering it as trauma, and that we can actually work with the trauma of it without making ourselves wrong for having made that choice, without making it any more than it is. I think it's really important to hold those nuances, especially when we're starting to do the hands-on work of healing.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, thank you. I'm just realizing how much is ironically silenced and suppressed under the guise of keeping the right, RIGHT, here. Yeah. And the pain that was present in the actual moment of my surgical abortion that I was told I must have misunderstood because it wasn't meant to be as painful. I'm just remembering that almost for the first time in so many years. Um, and then this reality that you spoke to, which I know is really confronting for so many women, the colostrum or the other signs that the body is postpartum. The body was preparing for this to continue. We intervened, and how to navigate that with the physical as well as the emotional when we're in this scoop of real falsities that shouldn't be named. Or so then it's like, how do I even express this, let alone confront what it's bringing to me? So I can absolutely see the ways in which somebody holding with softness, with reverence, that scar for us can be so powerful. And I'm really, thank you. You're helping me understand STEAM and how it really works for supporting us through terminations in an
Absolutely.
even more profound way. And yeah. Oh, well, Juliana, I am so grateful. I'm interested to know if there's any thread of a conversation or any aspect of this that you were hoping we would get to that we might not yet have touched. And then would love to invite in a closure with some awareness that I will name, that like we will be holding conversations and give people ways to continue to process what this might have brought up for them.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. I think we touched on a lot of it. For anyone who's listening to this, I imagine that there's probably a lot of feelings coming up in your body, right? And this is part of the conversation. When we have feelings, we want to categorize them, right? We want to understand. And part of the conversation that we're inviting here is, can we stay with the paradox? Can we stay with the nuance? Can we stay with both the relief and the grief? Can we stay with both the confusion and the clarity? Can we stay in that sort of soft space without needing to make anything right or wrong? And so, just to offer to those who are listening that that might be swirling a little bit right now, and that that's really, really normal. It means that you are turning toward the experience that you've had. And I think that anything is possible. I really believe in story medicine, and this is what we talk about a lot in the mystery school, is whatever our story has been, can we turn all the way towards it and really weave this thread of narrative and the choice and the why and the understanding, at least for ourselves. It might not even have to be a story that we ever tell to anybody out loud, but when you reclaim your story, just hearing you tell your story about the young woman who made the choice that she did and then got on a plane that same night and then had to confront her mother, to be able to weave that narrative together sort of defragments, like it weaves these fragments of self back together. And I think when we have these experiences of abortion or termination, or these experiences that don't necessarily have a home in the fabric of society, we can start to feel very fragmented. And so my prayer here with this conversation
Mhm.
is that we can start to weave those pieces back together and not feel like we have to fragment everything out, even just in the privacy of your own heart, even in just the privacy of your own body and your own womb, of what it means to be a woman, what it means to be walking in a female body, what it means to be in the inquiry of these rites of life giving and death giving all at once.
Thank you. You just spoke to all the twigglies, as we sometimes call them, grounding them, weaving them so beautifully, to share my resonance with hoping that people have some time to be with the conversation and be with themselves with whatever might have been brought forth, and try to take a moment to drink something nourishing and hydrating and grounding, and to know that we're here and we're on Instagram and our website, really intentionally creating healing spaces for integration. And this, as Juliana so beautifully said, this weave of the fragments into that wholeness that is paradoxically already here, I truly believe. And yet we also need to weave to get to. I am just so grateful. And would you tell us where people go and turn to and how to work with you both virtually and in person?
You can find me on Instagram at boldly embodied. So boldly embodied, it's my manifesto, it's my prayer, and this is part of that. Like, how do we be boldly embodied, right? Because actually being in our bodies takes a lot of courage. It's a pretty freaking bold thing to do.
Very bold.
So to actually feel all that there is to feel, to actually weave together the narratives, to actually defragment and be here while we're here, is quite a bold thing to do. So boldly embodied, boldlyembodied.com is also my website. I offer hands-on ceremonial pelvic care here in my temple in Vermont. The best way to really tap into my virtual world, if you are a mother, is through the mystery school, through Bone Song. That's really where we are gathering and having these very deep conversations. So you can find out all the things. There's always lots cooking in Boldly Embodied, and you can find out everything that's going on through my website or through my Instagram.
I am in awe. You are such a prolific and profound poster. And sometimes I just think like, well, right, this is the path of a boldly embodied person, because somehow she's found space to be grounded and prolific. I will raise my hands to being inspired and not quite there yet. I'm so determined for us to really showcase through Kitara, you know, posts that are really offering and meaningful and not only part of the noise that's in those spaces. And I really look to you as somebody who challenges me, sometimes going down a bit of a rabbit hole of thinking it's not possible, because here you are being boldly embodied and showing up for us with such beautiful depth of creation in spaces where that isn't always the norm.
Oh,
So thank you.
thank
And
you so much.
yeah, I'm really grateful for you being there, yeah, leading us.
Thank you so much, Kit, and thank you for this really beautiful conversation, and I hope it just is supportive and helpful to anyone who's needing to hear it.
Thank you. Thank you for listening. I went for that steam that Juliana and I spoke of after we stopped recording on the song called Calling Us Home by Olivia Fern, whose music I highly recommend for all moments in life, but certainly for steams. And that's my prayer. May this conversation have supported the call home to your heart. And please know I'm sending so much love and so much gratitude to you for being here, for the opportunity to share my story, to share the story of a soul sister with the intention of spreading depth, healing, owning nuance and paradox, so that we may support each other, see each other, hold each other, celebrate, honor each other. For more information, please do keep an eye out on kitaralove.com, where I'll be sharing more information about steaming and how the practice can support the healing of abortion and terminating pregnancies, and also about any upcoming gatherings that we do intend and hope to have to further these conversations in groups and to hold ceremonial space for the deepening of healing for you in your body and in your heart and womb. So much love. Thank you for the opportunity to have these conversations and to be in this moment of time with you.